CicelyTyson's career started at the Red Cross.
I remember sitting to the left of Mrs. Johnson, who had been there forever, right? And I remember this party, and I remember them presenting her with this watch, and I sat there looking at it. I said, after 30 years, a watch? Oh my God, I was looking at this woman who put so much time into this organization. I said, I'm never, ever going to be any place where they're going to give me, after that length of time, a watch. I said, I'm going to buy my own wristwatch.
Hello, listeners. This is Warren Wade Anderson.
Mark Barossi.
Reggie Valentin.
Tony Sherry.
Welcome to the first episode of Antilles, a podcast forum where we discuss the contributions of Caribbean immigrants and their descendants to the arts and culture of the United States. The voice you just heard in the cold opening belongs to the incomparable Cicely Tyson. Before her death on January 28th, 2021, at the age of 96, she was best known for her work on the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, the original 1977 Roots miniseries, and a recurring role on the TV series How to Get Away with Murder. We think the best way to bring Miss Tyson's incredible 70-year acting career into focus is to look at her life before and immediately after the world recognized her in the 1972 film Sounder. Just a few quick notes. Please watch the film before listening to this episode. This upcoming discussion is filled with movie spoilers. The audio clips of Miss Tyson throughout this episode were taken from Oprah Winfrey's Masterclass podcast. I'm going to start with you, Mark. Mm-hmm. What do you think about Cicely Tyson? What comes to mind?
When I think of Cicely Tyson, I think of a woman who is so genuine. I think of a woman that is so pure into the craft of acting, but also making a very strong presence. I luckily, and I wasn't going to say this, luckily had a chance to meet her directly. The time that I remember I was working in a retail store, Midtown Manhattan, and a customer walked in, and I really didn't pay much mind to it, but this woman just walked to me with these eyes of pain. And I want to answer your question, but I hope you can understand it by me explaining this, is that when she came and spoke to me, when I realized it was her, she was the very first person who shared that Ray Charles passed away. When he passed away, she walked up to me with such pain in her eyes, and she just spoke to me as if we've known each other for a number of years. And we just conversed for at least half an hour. And she just walked away. And when she walked away, I've cried because of the pain. So to answer your question, when I think of her, I think of someone who has covered an enormous body of work and has been represented our culture and women in a very elegant and classy way. So that's my answer to your question.
Thanks, Mark. Reginald?
She embodies the craft of acting, and everything that I've seen her play in, I can't imagine anybody else playing those roles. And I remember seeing her as a young kid growing up, seeing her in shows like Roots and things like that. I've never really paid attention to her seriously until I would say in my 20s. Going back and looking at some of the stuff that she's done, and I used to always not really pay too much attention to her craft and how good she was until recently, I would say. I remember seeing her in Hoodlum, which is a movie I really liked with Lawrence Fishburne and Vanessa Williams and whatnot. And I took that for granted until she passed away. I realized how much of an impact her career had on a lot of people. Needless to say, I think that she is one of the greatest actresses that we've had, not just black or white, just greatest actress. One of the greatest actresses we've ever had on the screen.
Tony?
Yeah, to reinforce what Reginald was saying, my first personal experience with Cicely Tyson is watching the movie Busting Loose with Richard Pryor. where it was a comedy, but if you look at that movie, the drama, even with Richard Pryor, I mean, if you look at anybody who reviews that movie, they say that that was one of Richard Pryor's like best acting roles because of the drama that came out of there. So that's how I was introduced to Cicely Tyson. I didn't really. For me, she was the woman in Bustin' Loose. Like, when I was a kid, that she was just the woman that played the straight lady to Richard Pryor's comedy role. She got my attention, but it wasn't until I did my own like personal research. I'm like, wait a minute, this woman's an icon.
Born in Harlem on December 19th, 1924, Miss Tyson lived on East 102nd Street from the time of her birth until the age of 9 with her parents, older brother, and younger sister. Her father, William, and her mother, Frederica, were immigrants from the island of Nevis, the birthplace of U.S. founding father Alexander Hamilton. William arrived in 1919, a year before women received the right to vote. Frederica followed suit. William was a complicated man. On one hand, he was a loving father to Cicely. On the other, he was a philanderer who assailed her mother whenever she confronted him on his extramarital affairs. In 1933, Frederica packed up her and her children's belongings and moved out of the apartment they shared with William, the day his aggression extended outside the confines of their bedroom. I believe this was a formative moment that taught Cicely to be fiercely independent and steadfast in her own convictions. Now essentially a single mother, Frederica became a disciplinarian with a short leash on her kids. That leash was unable to prevent Cicely from becoming a teenage mother at the age of 17. The resulting child was a catalyst that brought Miss Tyson to the secretarial staff of the Red Cross, and the epiphany, as stated in the cold opening, that made it possible for her to think about other life pursuits. This detour eventually led her to the world of acting. When Frederica found out about her daughter's new career, she asked her to leave their shared residence. Like Frederica, Cicely located and moved into her new apartment that day. Within a short period of time, she started to train with luminaries like Ruby Dee, Ossie Davis, Harry Belafonte, and Sidney Poitier. In an effort to win her mother's approval, Cicely invited Frederica to her first play, Dark of the Moon, in 1957.
At the end of this play, I come out and my mother is standing at the door accepting congratulatory remarks from the people. Yes, I always knew ever since she was a little girl that she was going, she liked to sing and dance. And so I always knew she was going to do this. I said, wait a minute. My mother, who put me out of her house and didn't speak to me for almost 3 years, is standing there telling this barefaced story to these people. Right? And so I then knew that it was something within me that she felt was a gift.
Starting in 1954, Miss Tyson played supporting roles on 5 films, 21 TV shows, 12 plays, before landing a leading role in the film Sounder, directed by Martin Ritt. Let's talk about the movie.
Okay.
Let me start with Reginald here. What did you think about the movie?
I didn't know what to expect. I had never heard of the movie before until you recommended that we watch it, since we were going to talk about Cicely Tyson. And I'm glad I did, because it's a movie that I completely overlooked. I had no idea it even existed until I watched it. And I'm so grateful that I did watch it, because it was a great movie. I think some would say that looking at it in hindsight, there's so many movies that depict similar situations or whatever. But what I appreciated about the movie was the family was so tight. And you see that they were just trying to struggle within the American dream, trying to just survive in a system where for some it's a dream and for a lot of other people it's a nightmare.
It was Depression era
America.
Depression era Jim Crow South.
Jim Crow South. Yeah, so putting this in context, Depression era for anyone that's not black is terrible. And you got the element that you're black and you're a sharecropper. That's like 20,000 times more difficult. And you see the opening scene, the father's trying so hard to provide for his family, trying to chase down a raccoon with Sounder, which is the dog.
Right, which
And
is that's where the name of the movie comes from.
And that
Out of the Dog.
resonated with me because it's like this is like a basic human thing, which is to, well, as a man, to provide for their family. And you're looking at a situation where the family has a dearth of resources, and they're relegated to just like to just chasing a raccoon to provide for the family. And that opening scene in and of itself was so significant to me, and it really set the stage for how heavy the movie was going to be, just in the perspective of looking at and unpacking the dynamics of a family in need and how they survive. It was very moving, even from jump. It was very moving.
Let me ask Tony then. What did you think about, because Reginald mentioned the opening, he set it up for us. What did you think about Nathan Lee, played by Paul Winfield, is along with the dog and his son, who played, the character's name is David Lee. They were chasing this dog so they can get the raccoon so they can get something to eat.
Right.
They never got the raccoon. He tried to shoot it. He missed.
Yep.
And right away you saw the vulnerability of the father.
Yep.
What do you think the filmmaker was trying to tell us in that moment about the father?
Everything that the father's goal, the father understood his function, and when he couldn't establish his function, he did not feel like a man, like the failure. I think all of us in this room, we're all fathers, we're all husbands. We can relate to that because if our family is in want, at the end of the day, it's on us. So I love the movie because the movie was simple. The story was very simple. There was no big hook to it. There was no big anything.
Reveal.
No, it was this is what the situation is, and which I loved about the whole movie was, I think the reason why I got so much acclaim is because yes, the story was simple. The themes were profound, with the father doing whatever he had to do for his family. If that movie wasn't perfectly acted the way it was, I don't think it would have gotten all the attention.
Mark, I wanted to ask, what did you think about CicelyTyson's performance? And because he comes back without the raccoon, which is the meal that they were looking for that night to eat. What did you think about that character that she was playing and how she responded to the fact that her husband couldn't get the meal?
She was kind of a very understanding it to an extent, but still giving him the silent look like, dude, what the hell are you going to do? That's how I took it. It wasn't something that belittled him in any kind of way, but it was definitely saying, we've got to figure this out.
I just want to ask Reginald, at the next day, there's food that appears in the kitchen.
Manna from heaven, right?
Yes.
Out of nowhere.
And eventually, the sheriff and the deputies come to arrest him. Saying that he stole the food. Do you think he stole the food?
That's a good. I didn't think of that. I assumed that I was going along with the plot and where everything was pointing to, and it appeared to me that he did steal the food. I think he did steal the food, but back to Mark's point. He felt the weight of the responsibility of being a provider, and so I think any man put in that position would probably do the same thing. you're a sharecropper in Jim Crow America.
Right.
Yeah, I would steal. I definitely would friggin' steal. And you have people who are titans of industry that have stolen. They're rich, and a lot of people it's arguable that some of the rich people in America and in the world have gotten to the position of becoming rich by
Stealing.
some level of thievery.
Yeah. Or deception.
So you're talking about someone who's just simply trying to provide protein. Literally protein. Basic nutrients for his
He's
family.
not getting rich from the theft.
And it's not like he's an immoral person.
Right.
We're talking about, like, even looking at fast forward, this is 1933 America. You're looking at the civil rights, and one of the tenets of civil rights is, it is your duty to oppose an unfair law, unjust law. You got to fight and oppose it or break the law.
Which brings me to the result of his theft, which is the sheriff showing up.
Right. But yeah, I mean, I would have done the same thing. I mean, he's a man that's trying to provide for his family. He took he didn't even petition or argue. Well,
let's get into it a little bit, because someone listening to this or someone who may have watched it may have another opinion. They may say, like, well, why couldn't he find other ways than just stealing? I mean, like,
there is no other way, because if you resort to chasing after flipping raccoons, what other way is there?
First of all, I don't think the sheriff came with a search warrant.
No, he didn't.
I was going to mention that, but I kind of went off a tangent. I mean, search and seizure, that part of the
He just walked into the house unannounced, uninvited.
That part of the Constitution doesn't apply to black people.
Right.
Neither is the part of where a family member needs to actually see their loved ones who are jailed. That's further down the movie, maybe a few minutes later in the movie, where someone who is arrested has not gone to trial. You know,
That's another instance, but it never showed in the movie. He never went to trial. He was just pronounced guilty.
Right. And then the sheriff refuses for his family to
members.
see him.
Right.
And that's a law that's exclusively
habeas corpus kind of law.
Well, no, I'm saying that's a law that's exclusively in that time pointed towards African Americans.
Right.
White people didn't have that issue where they couldn't see their family members in jail or whatever.
Because in the film, the character played by CicelyTyson, Rebecca, goes to visit her husband because they've taken him away, and at this point they've taken him away and injured the namesake of the movie, the dog, by shooting at it. But CicelyTyson is not given visitation to see her husband.
In my research, it was pointing to some of those laws about visitation on Sundays and how women couldn't visit prisoners was leaning towards some of the problems with women's rights as well.
Okay. I did not know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. So, and even when the boy, David Lee, is given visitation, he's humiliated because he brings a cake for his father, and the deputy manhandles the cake.
As we continue on the movie, I just want to go back for just a second.
Sure.
When he comes home the very next day, because Cicely calls for him in the middle of the night, looking for her husband.
Yes.
And the son is up, and there's that scene. But what I want to point out is that when the son got up and he noticed that there was food in the house, there was meat. He goes. The mother asked, "What does the dad want to eat?" And he made a very strict comment, like a very, very interesting comment. And I want us to overlook this, is where he made it clear that he wants the kids to eat
First.
Right. He wanted the kids to eat first. So
whatever was left over, he would take.
Right. So I just want to make it very clear that what he did was purely for his family. The next comment that I also wanted to make, the second to last comment that I want to make, is that when they came home, of course, I found it very interesting with the charges that were charged against the dad for the crime that he did, is exactly what the sheriff did. Because when they came home from the baseball game, the sheriff and whoever they were, who are not in uniform.
The deputies.
Right? They were not in uniform, but they were definitely armed.
They trespassed. I don't think they had a warrant.
They trespassed it and went into his home, but that's exactly what Paul's character Nathan Lee was charged for. He was charged for trespassing and robbery, and he was also charged to do a year of hard labor.
A hard labor for stealing meat.
Right. So I just wanted to point that out before we continue.
The thing that I found very interesting was there are a number of things in this film that I don't think any of us saw when we were younger. And a number of things that, on the face of it, I think if we weren't doing research into this, we probably would not have sat down and watched this film, is the boy's reaction to his father being imprisoned, and how it really kind of began to sort of really psychologically affect him. What did you think the writer and or the director was trying to say about that boy? And I guess the relationship that he felt with his father.
I just think that it goes back to show how strong their family structure was, and how needed the father was, and how much of a source of strength that father was for the boy. I was doing some research on the book.
The Sounder book.
Yes, the novel. What the movie didn't do as much as the book did was that Sounder was really, everything that happened to Sounder happened to the father. When the father was, if you remember, Sounder got hurt. The father came
eventually
back
got hurt. Yeah.
In the beginning of the situation, Sounder actually, when he was shot, he was away in the novel. He was away for as long as the father was away, and when Sounder came back, the father came back. It was just a whole bunch of parallels with the dog and the father.
I'm going to jump straight ahead in our discussion of the movie to the boy going to find his father, not finding his father, and meeting a school teacher, meeting a classroom.
I just interrupt for this
Sure,
1 second.
go ahead.
I just want to say I kind of read it a little differently, and I want to point this out for
What
discussion.
did you read differently?
I read the Miss Boatwright, right? That's her name.
Yes.
When she gave that Three Musketeers book.
Yes.
Understand my point here. When
Sure.
she gave him the book after she complimented the work of his mother,
Yes.
right? She gave him the book and she told him to read it. What caught my attention is that she said, "I want you to read it, and I want you to tell me what it was about." The way she said it made it feel like she was doubting him going to read the book and understand what's going on.
I don't think so. I don't think so because if she would not have given him that book if she didn't think he
Right.
was a promising
Which is
student.
true, but
And
what-
even the
I could see
scene
that.
where the Morgan family landlord, which I thought was is really deplorable. It sort of really showed what sharecropping is, which is basically you're living in such subsistence that you have to take out credit from your landlord in order to get basic supplies. And the landlord basically says, like, wasn't I the one who got your son into that special school? So it's obvious that the boy is a smart boy. And that woman, Miss Boatwright, has empathy for the family because she sees the family struggling and she sees the promise for the boy. That's why she's introducing him to that book.
And I get that, and I understand that because she never would have given the book, and I agree. But I still feel like she was kind of reserved in just making sure, hey, listen, is this the right thing, or do you guys understand? Are you up with what I'm sharing with you? Like there was this constant check with her. If you think of the scene when she was going over the map, she even paused and stopped and was like, "Are you guys
Understanding what I'm
yeah,
saying.
and that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying she think that she wasn't smart, but I noticed her character checking the family at certain points. Just to make
I'm glad
sure.
I'm glad you stopped me from going ahead because the more I think about it, the more I realize like there's a Morgan family, there is the kind of the sheriff and everyone else and the deputies and the landlord that represent kind of the oppressive arm of Jim Crow, and she's kind of in between. She wants to be on good terms with polite society, but she has a conscience, So she's both married to the system, but at the same time, her conscience is taking her out of the system, the unjust system. So she's a conflicted character. So even in her going, do you understand what I'm talking about? It's her kind of like, it's that character going, well, these people are not supposed to understand this. Like, I got to make sure they understand it.
And it's worth it because they do.
Yes.
Which I'm understanding that he is a small boy. He can read the book. If you even realize while he's reading the book to his siblings,
Yes.
even though he almost struggled on a book, on a
Yes.
word in the book, he still read the word.
Yes.
So I get what you're saying, but my point is just exactly what you explained. That she was just checking to make sure, hey, listen, should I continue listening to my conscience? Okay, good. Yes, read the book. Do you guys understand what I'm saying about this map? Okay, good. I'm going to continue with this, which goes into why, or this is a little before, why she continued going through that file cabinet after the sheriff left. And the sheriff came back and was like, I could really get you in trouble for this. And he explained the consequences. And she was like,
Yes.
no, I'm going to continue listening to my conscience because I know this is right.
Yes. But the boy, David Lee, who couldn't find his father and found another school and found this teacher, there's another kind of Easter egg where she lays down there. I mean, he discovers that there is a school full of black kids that are learning the things that he wants to learn. Go ahead.
That to me was a very important part of the movie where he walked in, and I think the director deliberately blocked or didn't show the face of the teacher at the opening of that scene because he's just bewildered by what he's experiencing. You don't know what he's really experiencing. You just see a school setting, a classroom setting, and then you see the face of the teacher as a black teacher teaching the kids, and the kids seem to be in sync. The kids seem to be learning.
Right.
What I found
focused.
Right. So my takeaway from that was this is like a different world for him in terms of what he's learning is so significant and relevant and important to his race, because when he went over to her house and she started to reveal to him or show him all the other important black figures.
Right, she reads him
culture,
a kind of W.E.B.
quote,
Du Bois
right.
kind of readings from the of training of black men to David. Yeah,
right. And I don't think he ever knew there were black people that were that significant, and that exposed him to an aspect of culture that I don't think he even knew existed.
yes,
Harriet Tubman, she brought that up. And so to me, that opened up a whole new world of like black history that I don't think he even knew. And even me as a first time viewer, this movie came out in '72. And what was the name of the one of the first people who died in the Revolutionary War, a black man, Atticus, Crispus Attucks. Right.
that's right.
Right. So that movie came out in '72, and that information is already there. I'm finding about that information somewhat recently in my, education in terms of like important figures that we should all know about as black people. It's not general information. I think that's why I think that movie is so important.
Because in our education,
That movie, you talk about Easter eggs. That movie's been there for a while, and we did not. For the most part, I would take a survey, and I would bet most of our contemporaries don't know that movie even exists.
That's true. But in our education, even now, in the 21st century, it's the thing is that even now we're not given that kind of broad education. We're like, there was slavery, and then there was Martin Luther King, and then we were free.
But look how far he had to travel to get that information.
I was going to go to my ending, man. Don't mess up my ending, man. Don't mess up my ending. I was going to talk about that, brother.
He's in a school where there's a lot of white kids there, and this white school teacher is teaching about Huckleberry Finn.
Yes.
About a lowly, meek, black slave who escaped and
Servile, yeah.
Right.
That form of writing I thought it was important that they mentioned that those writings earlier because what Warren was saying, that form of writing had a lot of symbolism in it as well as this movie.
But
had a lot of
also at the
symbolism.
beginning, the shots of Nathan and David Lee, it looked kind of like the silhouette of Huckleberry Finn.
Yes,
and
done purposely. That was on purpose. Yep.
Yeah.
I thought the same thing.
He had to really travel far and go through hardships to get that information. Where his father was imprisoned, and he luckily stumbled on the school teacher who had to herself take him under her wing. So this is like another metaphor.
literally
for,
take him in.
take him in. This is another metaphor for you need a mentor who could really take you in and really show you your history and show you your worth, because other people will tell you that you're worth
Less.
not as much,
Worth less.
you're worthless, and you gotta really work really hard, harder than your other counterparts, to get basic essential information.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me cut to the boy coming back and then the father coming back.
Can I ask one question before
Sure.
we go there? Was there anything there with the lifestyle of the teacher? Were they trying to tell us anything? Her house was nice. Yeah, she was single, no children. Was there anything there with that?
I think what it was showing him was that there's another
Different-
way.
Yeah, that's what it was.
It was another way.
Because she was the exact contrast of
Because
what was happening in the film.
and I'll get into it a little more, which is when he gets back home and the mother greets him and his brother and sister greets him, and the father comes back, and there's that kind of iconic scene, as you mentioned, Tony, where the father's walking up hobbling up the roadway to his house, and Rebecca is running down to meet Nathan. That is a very big scene. As a matter of fact, it said that, and I think Tony was hinting at it, that was such an emotional scene for the director and the cinematographer that they
I'm not gonna lie, even I was moved.
yes.
That was a very moving scene.
What was moving about it for you?
Honestly, I didn't expect them to be reunited. I thought this movie was going to end very tragically. And to see him hobbling back to be reunited with his family, it was just like, this is like an exception to what I assume to be the rule for a lot of families in that era. And it was gratifying to see that. It was comforting to see that. It was good to see that. But it was also very moving because you see the determination. You mentioned determination earlier. I mean, that man was determined. And when you later on, when he tells you, start to reveal the story of how he got out, I mean, he came close to dying, and he willed himself
He does say that.
to survive.
Yes.
And
To come back to his family.
To come back to his family. And it's so important I think it goes to show you how important the man is in the family. The father figure is so important to the family. And he understood the weight of that, and come hell or high water, he had to make sure that he got back to his family. Now that's why, to me, all of that came to mind when I saw that scene, and that's why it moved me.
So now the father is back, and the father is damaged. He got damaged in the hard labor camp. They put him in harm's way after they try to dynamite probably some rubble somewhere. The son is glad to see him back, but very soon afterwards, the father is telling him he needs to go to that school that he discovered. Oh, yeah. And the son runs away. Like, what did you think about that scene where Nathan goes to speak to David about going to the school?
I think it made sense. If you really think about it, it made complete sense. And I'll tell you why. Because in the very beginning of the movie, the dad is talking about the son going to school, and the son quickly is like, somewhere around there, the son is like, or the dad's saying he doesn't have to go to school because he wants to help out with whatever needs to go on in the house. I don't remember the exact dialogue at this point, but even the mom even said that at some point, because the son realizes that he has this role in the house that he has to help out. The mom also points out that she needs him. Like if he goes to school or he goes to that school after the dad, before the dad comes back, or when he comes back after looking for the dad, if he decides to go to that school, because he talks about how the teacher sent him back to ask the mom if it's okay for him to, because she's willing to open up her home for him to live with her, that the mom was like, well, if you go, then who's going to help out around the home? Or he says that. So I think when the dad came about and talked about it, I'm very sure in his mind, he knew that it's better for him, because if you think about it again, going back in the movie, when he was in the cell, he tells his son, this is someplace you never want to be. And I also want to mention that the dog, Sounder, was a silent narrative throughout the entire movie. I don't want us to not...
Tony mentioned that, like, whatever happened to the father whatever happened to the dog happened to the father also.
The reason why they call the dog Sounder, because of the noise that the dog would make. And if you noticed, once everything was going bad, the dog wasn't loud anymore. It wasn't Sounder anymore until the father came back. Yes. Remember, he didn't start barking until the father came back.
Yes.
So that's all Tom Sawyer. That's all like symbolism and parallels. And so even though the movie was very simple, if you looked at it superficially, it's a very simple story, but there was a lot of symbolism in that movie. Yeah, it was good.
So, just to give you a little background on the film here. So the film, like I told you, Cicely Tyson was paid $6,000 for it. She was originally supposed to be second on the bill. Paul Winfield was supposed to be first. But because of her performance, they put her up front. And Paul, at that time when they were making the film, her and Paul Winfield were having an affair. So, yes. And by the way, Paul...
Didn't know that one.
Yo.
And Paul Winfield at the time was 32. And she was 47.
Wow.
Cougar had himself a little cougar moment. Wow.
But that goes into what I was saying about the way they would stare at each other. Thank you, brother. That goes into what I was saying about how they would like stare at each other with no words. It's almost like they were having a real yet character played role with each other.
It was a real affair.
Yeah, like how when she was outside and he made the comment about one thing we have is a lot of wood or something like he said like that. I was laughing on the inside, but I was hey yo. But anyway, I look at them like at first I watched the movie twice. All right, so what? I watched the movie twice.
He said, we may not have no meat on the table. We got all this wood. Wink, wink. We got this wood. Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, I mean, that'd be Rebecca.
Rebecca. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
But it also played very well in the movie, which is the reason why I'm stressing that scene.
Yeah, really good chemistry.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, everything came into focus
scene.
for that film, that made that film, because it originally was supposed to be just a kids film.
Really?
Yeah, it was supposed to be just a kids film, and then when the studio took a look at it, they're like, "Wait a minute, there's something here." The film, like I told you, the budget was $1.9 million, and after the film, they took a look at it and the film came out, they decided to spend $1 million promoting it. Yes, and I'm sure, as you guys probably researched, like, she was nominated for an Academy Award for that role.
Was he nominated also? A lot of people were nominated, right?
Actually, he was. Yeah, Paul Winfield was nominated. He was nominated for an Academy Award. But the other thing too, I wanted to bring you guys' attention to. So, in the film, 1.9 million and made almost $17 million. It's almost 800% profit. I mean, I was not completely accurate. She did get $6,000 and a red Pinto. So there's
She got a Pinto?
Yes.
Nice.
I wanted to give you a little more perspective on that salary that she had. Also that year in 1972, the film The Getaway was out. That's with Ali McGraw and Steve McQueen. That film was made for $3.3 million. And that actress, Ali McGraw, she got $300,000 for her role.
Damn.
Now, someone's listening who might be a film buff might say, well, Warren, she deserves that much because the year before, she starred in one of the most successful romantic films ever, which is Love Story with Ryan O'Neal. Mm-hmm. But when I went back and took a look at her first role, and again, she's 15 years younger than CicelyTyson. Right. Her first role was in Getaway came out in 1972. Her first role was in 1969. And she got $10,000 for her first role, which today translates to $71,000. The inequity there is quite obvious. Mm-hmm. The other thing I wanted to sort of play a little bit of the press reaction to the film when it came out.
I was being interviewed by a very sophisticated woman for the LA Times, and she said to me, I didn't believe the relationship between you and Nathan, your husband. And I asked what she meant. She said, well, I don't believe that Black people had the kind of relationship that was portrayed in love relationship that was portrayed in that film. So I asked if she realized what she was saying. I said, you're saying that we're not human beings. Huh? Well, she said, well, I don't know them. She's talking to me. I don't know them. I don't go to school with them. I don't live with them. I don't socialize with them. So I really don't know what they're like. I said, well, I must tell you that you could live in this country during the civil rights era and not know what we are as a race of people. I cannot excuse that. Your crime lies in your ignorance. And so it was that made me, those kinds of experiences made me decide that I could not afford the luxury of just being an actress. That I had a number of issues that I wanted to address, and that I would use my career as my platform.
I play that because in the immediate aftermath of Sounder, she realized, she was shocked when she was nominated for the Academy Award. Obviously, she did not win. Liza Minnelli won for Cabaret. She went on to star in a TV movie called The Autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, for which she was nominated for an Emmy and won an Emmy. And then they gave her another Emmy for, they created an award, a special Emmy award for that performance. She became more selective about the roles that she chose. Even though at that particular time, like 1972, when Sounder came out, that's when Shaft came out. And the blaxploitation movies was heavy coming out, because she thought that they were, the characters that were portrayed in these kinds of movies were not dignified. They were just kind of racist tropes. She went on to star in roles, TV and movies for the next 50-odd years until her recent passing. And, I think that there's something that we can all kind of learn from her, which is even after Sounder and the Academy Award and Jane Pittman, there were lean years where she'd have to take on speaking engagements just to pay the rent. The thing that I got from my research on Ms. Tyson was, pick something that you love, try to be as good as possible at it, stick to it come hell or high water,
That clip you just played was so telling and powerful. It's funny because I thought about the whole idea of humanity. We have not been regarded as humans. We meaning black people, but have been reduced to our circumstances and the perception that our limitations equal our character. And the dominant society tends to look at us as domesticated animals in a way, and I parallel that to even the dog Sounder, right? Regardless of how smart we become or how compassionate we are or how nonviolent we are, we're still regarded as animals that they were gracious enough to give civilization to or salvation from savagery, right? So like what I'm trying to say is, in the scene where Nathan talks about how Sounder was a good hound dog because a bad hound dog would have just, like if he caught the raccoon, he would have tore the raccoon up, right? It brings to mind how some people seem to regard us as such, as animals, like as a domesticated animal, even though we're constantly trying to prove to the world that we're smart, capable, and productive. We can't seem to prove to them our humanity. I think that's what she's trying to echo here, because you have that figure, Miss Boatwright, who some would say that she's the typical white savior figure in that movie, and she's the only sane person.
But she isn't the typical, because she's the only one.
She's the only one, right. Well, I mean, in most movies like that, there's always only one.
But Miss Boatwright is conflicted. Right. Even in helping them, she's conflicted. Right. She wants to help them, but she doesn't. She also doesn't want to lose her place in the white establishment.
White savior archetype comes in different forms,
That's true.
For the sake of variety, I think the director or screenwriter wants to put a little element of differentiation between this one and that one or whatever it is. And I think this character, you see a conflict between her wanting to conform to societal standards and her wanting to actually genuinely help the family. But is still a white savior.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that she's the only sane person in an insane world that views us predominantly as people who are not worthy of being considered human.
Who? Miss Boatwright? The Miss Boatwright character?
No. Well, Miss Boatwright recognizes that, but she's the only person. Because the institution is flawed. The institution regards black people as subhuman, but you have one or two people who want to help out and scream from the rooftops that, hey, this is wrong, this is immoral.
But, as much as the Miss Boatwright character is a kind of trope, in regular life, we need those people.
I'm not arguing that point. I'm just saying, as far as we're talking about symbolisms and what and who represents what in the movie. I think she represents the white savior character.
Mm-hmm. I just want to comment on what you just said. Your translation of what about the movie on that scene, it reminds you of a scene. Just to blurt it right on out. You reminded me of the scene where after the dad gets arrested and CicelyTyson's character goes into, it's not the butcher, but she goes to the grocery store to get a couple things.
That's the landlord.
Mr. Perkins.
He's the landlord. He's a sharecropping landlord.
Okay, and she produces crop for him, right?
Yes.
What I'm just going to wrap up and say is, he rambles off and talks about how we kind of deserve what he did or what the dad did, but he goes and says, "But I've been good to you," right? And she doesn't. CicelyTyson's character doesn't respond. Right. And she just keeps packing, but in her mind she's thinking. So it goes into what you were saying about how Miss Boatwright, right? That's her name. Mm-hmm. How she was doing good because she's listening to her conscience. Where I don't think he was really listening to his conscience. He was kind of going on, right? And he was just looking at her like,
he's thinking about
I've done
his
well
line.
by you.
That's all he's thinking about. That's it.
But she ends off in responding to that and saying, we're just going to keep working for you, even though the dad's not there, because we know we owe you.
Because the thing is, I think she recognizes that he's being unfair. He's not just taking care of his bottom line; he's taking advantage of them, which is the whole point of sharecropping. Like sharecropping isn't an equitable, fair system. It's slavery. So
It's a cross between slavery and feudalism.
right, exactly. So
Well,
at
you
least
speak
Miss
to a
Boatwright
lord.
was helping David Lee in a way where she was teaching him and giving him access to real resources, which is books, which is literature, which is an education.
Right, she's sort of opening the doorway to another life.
To another life. Whereas he wanted to maintain a status quo and further exploit these people. And if you read about sharecropping, you also could see how in certain other anecdotal accounts or just historical accounts, you see that a lot of sharecroppers took advantage of the fact that some of the people that worked for them that they were taking advantage of didn't know how to read, and so they would mess up or mess up the ledgers so that
Miscount so that they could steal from
they
their-
could steal from them.
Larry Wilmore, comedian, said, these movies like these need to stay in our consciousness because they're kind of receipts of that time.
Yes.
Because what will happen is that as time goes on, there's amnesia that happens, and they say things like, "Why don't you guys pull yourself up by your bootstraps? Like, why don't you guys, why are you complaining so much?" And what the movie does, and the reaction to the movie does, is it shows you, like what Reginald was saying, the system that's in place, and the system. It's almost like to bring back to the movie analogy. It's kind of like a bad sequel that comes back over and over again. You see Sounder, sharecropping is no longer kind of a dominant part of Southern life, but an educated journalist is saying, I don't believe that black people can have normal, loving life.
Yeah. Snoop Dogg made
The
a
philosopher
comment.
Snoop Dogg?
Yes, he made a comment that just bothered me a couple of years ago when 12 Years a Slave came out. And he says, I'm tired of these movies. He said, I'm tired of seeing our people depicted in this way.
What does that bother you?
He just feels that the history's there. We already know about it. Why are they still pumping movies to show us in that light? And I still feel that there's still a narrative, there's still information, even to this day, that is still not given. There's still a narrative that people still need to hear.
I kind of understand why Snoop would say that.
I understand that too, because it's painful to see.
Not just because it's painful, because it perpetuates this narrative that our history starts at slavery. I think balance is key. We need to know about our dark history. Not just for us.
Everybody needs to know.
Right. But not just for us to know about it, for white people to remember it. This is the problem with this country. White people refuse to acknowledge that slavery even happened. They refuse to come to grips with their responsibility regarding slavery. They want to make it seem as if it was a blip in the radar, that it was my grandfather that did it. It's not me. That guy was an asshole. I'm a new and improved white guy who loves black people. I have mad black friends.
Yep, let's move forward.
They literally want to detach themselves from slavery. But
And I'm bringing it back to CicelyTyson, which is the reason to sort of remember. It's a reason to remember her too, because she was kind of standing in that storm
right.
long before we were conscious that she was doing it.
Okay, before we wrap up, I want to shine a light on a couple things that might have gotten lost in the excited exchanges of our banter. The first is giving reverence and proper credit to 3 prominent supporting actors. Let's start with Kevin Hooks, who played David Lee. Protagonist who goes on a journey to find his father and bring him back to his mother and siblings. Hooks went on to direct a remake of Sounder in 2003. The next actor is Carmen Matthews.
the sole white champion of the Lee family. Miss Matthews was best known for her guest starring roles on a number of well-known TV series and movies between 1957 and 1989. The last journeyman actor that deserves credit for the film's success is Janet McCallan. She played Carmen Johnson, the black teacher that showed David Lee there was a world of opportunities beyond subsistence farming. Like Carmen Matthews, Miss McCallan worked in television and movies for over 30 years until she passed away on October 11th, 2010. I will focus the last spotlight on how the inequity depicted in Sounder was also evident in the stark contrast between the leading actor's remuneration in two of the most popular films of 1972. CicelyTyson was paid $6,000 for her work on Sounder. At the date of this recording, $6,000 would be roughly worth $45,600. In contrast to Ms. Tyson's $6,000, Ally McGraw made $300,000 for her role in The Getaway. This would be worth about $2.3 million today. I mention this discrepancy not as a means to grandstand, but as a way to say that very little has changed over the last 50 plus years. While I'm pointing out the unequal salary compensation between white and black actors, there are also the stubborn inequities between men and women's salaries. It's important, very important, to challenge these systems if one is put in positions of power. This episode of Antilles was produced by Tony Sherry, Reginald Valentine, Mark Barozzi, and myself. Join us next week for our discussion on Sidney Poitier's undeniable contribution to American and world cinema. In the meantime, we would invite you to watch another significant Cicely Tyson work, the 1974 television film, The Autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. Thank you for listening to Antilles.